A Chocolate Chip Cookie Murder, Chapter 16, Part 2. Betty was standing near the orchestra, tapping her foot in time with the music. She looked as if she wanted to dance, but it was doubtful that any of the local men would ask her. Betty was what Hannah and her friends in high school had unkindly called heavy duty. She weighed close to 300 pounds, and she wasn't known for her grace on the dance floor. Hannah's father had once quipped that a man needed steel-toed boots to dance with Betty, and more than one man in Lake Eden had nursed an injured foot after an obligatory turn around the floor with her. As always, Betty was dressed in vertical stripes. Someone must have told her that they were slenderizing, and they might have been, for someone less bulky. Betty's stripes were wide tonight, and they were dark green and burgundy. The colors were pretty, but that didn't stop Betty from resembling the side of a circus tent. As she walked closer, Hannah made a mental vow to go on a diet and shed the 10 extra pounds that she'd been carrying around since last Christmas. "Hi, Betty," Hannah called out a cheerful greeting. Since there was no one else around, it was obvious that the local males feared for their insteps, and Hannah knew she'd never have a better chance to interview Betty about Max's meeting. Betty reached out to pat Hannah's arm. "You look gorgeous tonight, Hannah." "Thanks." Hannah knew it was only polite to return the compliment, but what could she say? Then she spotted Betty's shoes, and she had her answer. "Your shoes are great. They match your dress perfectly." Betty smiled, apparently satisfied. "Is there any news about poor Ron?" "Not yet. I'm glad I found you, Betty. I need to talk to you about Max." Betty swallowed, and her face turned pale. "I knew it. There's something wrong, isn't there?" "Wrong?" Hannah was puzzled. "Why do you think there's something wrong?" "Max hasn't called in yet, and that's not like him at all. He's a very hands-on manager. Last year, he called me 3 times a day." "There's nothing wrong as far as I know," Hannah reassured her. "I just wondered if he knew about Ron, that's all." Betty fanned her face with her hand. "You practically gave me a heart attack. I'm probably just imagining things, but it's just so strange that Max hasn't called. Shirley, over at the Milky Way Dairy, said Gary's called in every morning." "Did Gary mention seeing Max at the convention?" "No, and Shirley can't call him to ask, because Gary won't tell her where he's staying." Betty's face crinkled in a huge smile, and she moved closer. "Gary is a bachelor, and this is his big chance to live it up a little, if you know what I mean. At least that's what Shirley thinks." "Shirley's probably right. Do you think that Max is doing the same thing?" "Max?" Betty sounded utterly astounded. "If you knew him as well as I do, you wouldn't even think it. Max has only 2 pleasures in life: money and more money." Hannah gave the appropriate laugh, even though she'd heard that particular comment about Max about 1,000,000 times before. "Did you know that Max had an early morning meeting in his office on Wednesday?" "He did?" Betty seemed genuinely surprised. "But he was supposed to leave at 5:30. That's awfully early for a meeting. Are you sure?" "That's what I heard." Betty thought about it for a moment, and then she shrugged. "Anything's possible, especially if it was about money. I know that Max was in the office early. They asked him to give the opening speech, and I typed it up for him on Tuesday night. I left it on my desk and it was gone when I came in the next morning." "You're sure that Max picked it up?" "I'm positive. He left a yellow sticky reminding me to order new file folders." Hannah decided not to tell Betty that Max had still been at the dairy at 6:15. It would only worry her. "Have you tried to call Max at the convention?" "Of course I have. They told me he wasn't registered at the Holiday Inn, but I didn't expect him to stay there. Max is very picky, and he just hated his room last year. It was right next to the ice cream machine." "How about the other hotels in town?" "I tried them, but they all said he wasn't registered." "Could Max be sharing someone else's room?" "Max!" Betty laughed so hard her ample bosom shook. "Max isn't the type to share. He always stays alone. Did you have him paged on the convention floor? Of course I did. They're having a big banquet tonight, and I called before I left home. Max didn't even answer my page. Hannah began to frown as an idea formed in her head. Was Max driving to Wisconsin alone? Yes. Gary Milk asked him to carpool, but Max didn't want to ride with him. And if you're thinking that he was in an accident, I already checked with both highway patrols, and he wasn't. I really expected him to call in before now, and it's got me worried. Hannah was worried right along with Betty, and she wondered if Max had made it to the convention at all. You said that Max did want to ride with Gary. Do you know why? Yes, but I really shouldn't tell you. Betty began to twist the handle of her burgundy clutch purse, a sure sign that she was uncomfortable. It's confidential. If you want me to try to find Max for you, you'd better tell me. I promise I won't tell anyone else. All right, Hannah. Betty twisted her purse handle again, and Hannah wondered whether the thin strap of leather would snap. The Milky Way is our biggest competitor, and Mike is working on a way to take over Gary's operation. That's why he didn't want to ride with him. Then Gary doesn't know about Max's plans. Betty gave her a look that had idiot written all over it. Max doesn't let anybody know what's going on until it's a done deal. That's the way he operates. But Max told you? Not exactly. I just happened to pick up the extension in my office when Max was talking to some loan company about buying up the paper on one of Larry's loans. Hannah didn't believe that Betty had just happened to pick up the extension. Betty was nosy, and that was why she was such a valuable contact. Has Max ever done anything like this before? Are you kidding? You don't get as rich as Max is by just selling cream and butter. How do you know for sure? You can't work for a man for 20 years without picking up a word here and there. Max is a regular shark when it comes to buying up businesses, foreclosing properties, and turning big fat profits on them. Hannah was about to ask another question when she saw Andrea waving at her. She patted Betty on the arm and made her excuses. Andrea is waiting for me and I've got to run. Thanks, Betty. How about Max? Do you think he's all right? I'll find out, Hannah promised, and then she quickly added up the new facts she'd learned. Ron had seen Max on Wednesday morning and now Ron was dead. And Max was supposed to be at the Buttermakers convention, but no one had seen him and he hadn't called in. Had Max shot Ron and fled the country? It was a distinct possibility. It was also possible that Max was lying low at the convention and he'd called Betty when all the excitement had died down. If Max thought he was safe, he might even waltz back into town as big as you please and act all shocked and saddened about the horrible crime that had cost Ron his life. What is it, Hannah? Betty looked anxious. I'm just thinking, when is Max due back? On Tuesday night. If Max decided to call in, Betty might tell him about the questions she'd asked. That would alert him and he'd hop the first plane out of the country. Hannah couldn't let that